When two people go no contact, silence becomes the language that speaks louder than words. But not all silences are the same. For most, no contact is an ache, a void filled with longing and reflection. For the dismissive avoidant, however, silence is something else entirely. It's familiar, it's safe, it's the space they have always known how to live in. And yet, even for them, no contact begins as comfort and slowly turns into confrontation. Because sooner or later, the quiet they once used to escape others becomes the mirror that shows them what they've been escaping all along. To understand what a dismissive avoidant feels during no contact, we need to look beneath the surface. Psychologists describe this attachment style as a pattern shaped by early emotional environments. Childhoods where love felt conditional, inconsistent, or suffocating. These individuals learned early that depending on others meant risk, so they developed an internal vow. I will meet my own needs. I will never need too much. I will not be hurt again. Jung would call this an overdeveloped persona, a mask of independence protecting the vulnerable inner child. When no contact begins, the dismissive avoidant experiences an initial wave of relief. The emotional pressure that once triggered their defenses has vanished. There are no demands, no confrontations, no vulnerability to manage. To them, distance feels like oxygen. It restores control. It recenters their autonomy. Their nervous system calms, and they convince themselves that this silence proves what they always believed, that they are better off alone. In the early stages, they rationalize the separation. They focus on logic rather than emotion. It was too complicated. We weren't compatible. They were too needy. These thoughts act as psychological armor. In Jungian terms, this is the ego defending its identity, protecting itself from the unconscious pain of loss. The dismissive avoidant isn't heartless. They are armored. But beneath that armor, feelings don't disappear. They're simply delayed. Weeks pass, and the silence deepens. This is when subtle cracks start forming. The dismissive avoidant may begin to think about you at random moments, a memory triggered by a song, a scent, a familiar phrase. But instead of allowing the emotion to surface, they push it down. They tell themselves it's meaningless. Yet the unconscious keeps whispering. Jung taught that what we repress will always return, often symbolically. For the avoidant, these returning memories are the psyche's attempt to integrate what they've denied. Attachment, connection, vulnerability. During this middle phase, something shifts internally. The avoidant begins to feel a strange discomfort they can't quite name. The peace they expected starts to feel hollow. Their routines continue: work, hobbies, social life. But the background feels muted. This isn't sadness exactly, it's emotional dullness. The protective wall that once kept pain out also keeps joy out. And for the first time, they may notice the emptiness inside the silence. Still, they resist introspection. Instead, they intellectualize the separation. They might think, it's for the best, or they'll move on. I'll move on. But underneath, the unconscious begins its quiet rebellion. Jung described this as the return of the shadow, the repressed part of the self that carries everything we refuse to feel. For the avoidant, the shadow is need, it's dependency, it's love. And when it stirs, it feels like threat. So they distract themselves. New interests, new conversations, maybe even new people. Anything to drown out the voice that says, you miss them. If you've ever been on the other side of this silence, you might mistake their calm for indifference. But beneath that calm, there's conflict. Avoidants fear closeness and abandonment at the same time. No contact triggers both fears, relief at distance and anxiety over loss. The problem is that they can't consciously process the anxiety because their defense system was built to suppress it. So it leaks out indirectly. Irritability, restlessness, insomnia, overworking. Their body feels what their mind denies. Around this time, many dismissive avoidants begin revising the story of the relationship. They oscillate between idealization and devaluation. Some moments, they remember you warmly. The laughter, the connection, the comfort. Other moments, they recall only the conflicts. This ambivalence protects them from the full weight of grief. They rewrite the past to stay emotionally in control. But every rewrite weakens their conviction. Deep down, they sense something unfinished. If no contact continues long enough, an important shift occurs. The outer mask, self-sufficiency, begins to falter. The avoidant's mind grows quieter, and without distraction, suppressed emotion starts to surface. It often arrives disguised as dreams, nostalgia, or a sudden emptiness that logic can't soothe. Jung would describe this as the unconscious demanding integration. The parts of the self exiled for years, the longing child, the emotional self, the capacity for intimacy, begin knocking on the door. At first, the avoidant resists. They may even double down on detachment. They might convince themselves they feel fine, or tell friends they've moved on. But this is the psyche's denial phase. Beneath it lies an emotional thaw. The heart, long frozen, begins to stir. And with that comes confusion. Because to feel again means to face the very vulnerability they've spent a lifetime avoiding. This stage is where anxiety quietly emerges. The dismissive avoidant begins to wonder what you're thinking. Have you truly moved on? Do you still care? Are you happier without them? These questions aren't expressions of love yet. They are reflections of control slipping away. Jung taught that the ego equates control with identity. Losing control over how you perceive them threatens their sense of self. They start to feel invisible. And invisibility is the one thing their ego cannot tolerate. When this discomfort grows, they often seek indirect reassurance. They might check your social media, ask mutual friends about you, or appear briefly in subtle ways. A random message, a story view, a song posted that feels strangely personal. These gestures are not always conscious attempts at reconciliation. They are unconscious bids for relevance. They're testing the psychic connection, trying to confirm they still exist in your emotional world. But what happens if you stay silent? If you hold your boundary and remain in no contact? For a dismissive avoidant, that silence slowly turns from comfort into confrontation. It forces them to meet themselves. The stillness becomes unbearable, not because of you, but because it exposes what they've denied, their own dependency. Beneath all the defenses, the truth emerges. They cared more than they allowed themselves to admit. At this point, two possible paths unfold. The first is reintegration. The second is regression. In reintegration, the avoidant begins to reflect honestly. They start recognizing the emotional patterns that drove the disconnection, the fear of vulnerability, the discomfort with need, the habit of withdrawal. This stage often brings genuine regret, not necessarily for losing you, but for losing the chance to be emotionally real. Jung called this process shadow integration, confronting the repressed aspects of the self to become whole. It's rare, but when it happens, it marks the beginning of emotional growth. In regression, however, the opposite occurs. Instead of confronting the pain, the avoidant projects it outward. They tell themselves you were the problem. They seek new relationships quickly, not from desire, but from avoidance. They repeat the pattern, trying to re-establish control elsewhere. It feels powerful at first. A reset, a clean slate, but deep down, it's the same fear replayed. The same unintegrated shadow dictating their choices. Jung warned that what we fail to make conscious reappears as fate. The avoidant's fate is repetition until awareness awakens. If you're the one waiting for the avoidant to feel something, understand this. They do. But they feel in delay. Their emotions are like ice melting slowly. They process love, loss, and regret months later than others. The same silence that healed you might only then begin to reach them. But even when they realize the depth of their feelings, pride and fear often keep them frozen. Their inner dialogue becomes a battle. Should I reach out? Versus, what if they reject me? For someone wired to avoid vulnerability, that risk can feel unbearable. In some cases, the avoidant will reach out indirectly. A neutral message, a casual check-in, something emotionally safe. They rarely express remorse openly. They test the waters, If you respond warmly, they feel relief but also renewed fear. The cycle of closeness and distance may restart unless real introspection has taken place. If you don't respond, they experience a quiet collapse. Not dramatic, but heavy. They withdraw into solitude, often convincing themselves it's destiny or incompatibility. Yet the deeper truth remains. They never learned how to stay connected without losing themselves. Over time, the dismissive avoidant's outer calm begins to fade. Their independence, once a badge of honor, starts to feel like isolation. They notice how relationships around them evolve, people building trust, sharing lives, growing together, and they begin to sense what they've missed. This awareness can either awaken humility or deepen defensiveness. Jung believed that the soul always seeks wholeness. Eventually, even the avoidant psyche longs for integration. It may take years, but the truth always returns. No one escapes their need for connection. If you both remain no contact, the avoidance journey continues internally. They may not reach out again, but the memory of what was unresolved lingers. It becomes part of their unconscious material, a lesson that follows them into every future connection. Some will finally face it, seeking therapy or self-reflection. Others will bury it deeper, layering logic over loneliness. But even buried, the truth remains. Their avoidance was never strength. It was self-protection, born from fear. What do they really feel, deep down, beneath the walls and silence? They feel the echo of what could have been. They feel curiosity about your life, even if they never ask. They feel shame for how they handled things, though they'll never say it aloud. They feel a strange grief, not for losing you, but for losing the version of themselves they might have become if they'd allowed love to stay. Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." The dismissive avoidant lives in that line. They think fate keeps them alone, but it's their unconscious fear directing everything. When no contact strips away distraction, that truth becomes visible. And for a mind built on control, nothing feels more threatening than clarity. But there is also hope in this silence. Because even if the avoidant never returns, awareness has begun to grow. The psyche learns slowly, but it never stops learning. Each ending leaves an imprint that pushes the avoidant closer to consciousness. Sooner or later, they will face themselves. The loneliness behind the independence, the love behind the fear. If you've gone no contact with a dismissive avoidant, remember this. Their lack of expression is not lack of feeling. It's fear of exposure. Their silence is not peace, it's defense. And their apparent detachment is a language they learned in childhood. One that says, "If I don't need you, I can't be hurt by you." But silence can't protect forever. Sooner or later, the need for connection breaks through, even if only in dreams or regrets. No contact for you is healing. For them, it's revelation. It reveals the emotional world they've kept buried under logic and pride. It forces them to see that their control was never control. It was avoidance. And while they may never admit it, they feel your absence in ways they don't yet understand. In time, the dismissive avoidant begins to realize that love was never the danger they thought it was. The real danger was never letting anyone close enough to prove otherwise. By then, they might try to return. Or they might not. But whether they come back or not, the lesson remains. No one can outrun the need for connection. So if you both go no contact, know this. You will heal through awareness. They will struggle through avoidance. But both of you, in your own way, are being led toward the same truth. That love cannot exist where fear governs, and fear cannot survive where self-understanding begins. Because in the end, what the dismissive avoidant really feels when they can't reach you anymore is not hatred, not indifference, but the slow awakening of a feeling they've spent a lifetime avoiding. The ache of being human.